Hello, and welcome to Apps, Zaps, Data Maps, how nonprofits can navigate the software integration world. We are really excited to have you here to talk to you about how software integration can help simplify your fundraising efforts and make your life easier. We're just going to hang on for just a second, another minute or so, while we give everybody time to get logged in. So hold tight, and we'll get started in just a minute. Now that almost everybody is logged in, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you so much for joining GuideStar for our webinar, Apps, Zaps, Data Maps, how nonprofits can navigate the software integration world. This webinar is presented by NeonCRM. Neon provides all-in-one CRM software, websites, and tools built just for nonprofits, and we're thrilled to have them to speak on today's webinar. Before we get started, there are a few logistics I wanted to go over with you so you get the most out of today's webinar. We really want this to be an interactive conversation, and we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can do that by submitting a question into the questions box on the control panel that's on the right-hand side of your screen. It's an image like you see right in front of you. We'll be saving your questions for our Q&A portion at the end of the webinar, but want to encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation. So as our presenter is speaking throughout the afternoon, feel free to send those questions in as you have them, and we'll be sure to get to as many as possible at the end. And to answer everybody's first question, yes, we are recording today's presentation, and we'll make it available to you after the webinar. In the next day or so, you'll be receiving an email from us with the recording, the presentation slides, and additional resources. So not to worry, you'll have access to all of this information now and in the future. So now that the logistics are out of the way, let's get started. My name is Arielle Gart, GuideStar's Marketing and Outreach Manager, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. In my role at GuideStar, I implement many of our externally facing marketing initiatives, including social media channels, our webinars, and online fundraising. And presenting on today's webinar, we are thrilled to have Tim Sarrantonio. Tim is a team member at NeonCRM and has more than 10 years of experience working for and volunteering with nonprofits. He has raised over $3 million for various causes, engaged and enhanced databases of all sizes, procured multiple successful grants, and formulated innovative communications and fundraising campaigns for several nonprofits. A two-time TEDx speaker, he has been invited to speak at numerous Association of Fundraising Professionals conferences, the Nonprofit Technology Conference, and for internationally recognized nonprofit leaders like GuideStar, as he is today, and the Chronicle of Philanthropy. He volunteers heavily in his home of Nisquena, New York. So we have a great webinar planned for you today, all about how integrating your software programs can help simplify your life and explore the various options that are available to nonprofits. Today, we'll cover why we feel integrations are so important, how you as a nonprofit should approach integrations, and we'll also share lots of examples and best practices. And we've also got a really great bonus for you with an Idealware CRM integration report that we'll share with you at the end. And of course, we will be taking some time to answer all of your burning questions. So to help us jump right in, I'm going to turn things over to Tim. Tim, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, excited to be doing this talk and to be partnering with GuideStar. This is a topic that I think is going to become more prevalent as we become more sophisticated as nonprofits with technology, as technology gets more integrated into our everyday lives. I'm literally wearing a smartwatch, which I 2 years ago made fun of. So like things and attitudes change with this. So I'm really excited to kind of tackle this with everyone in the room today, and so we can learn together. So when it comes to today, just a tiny bit extra about me in terms of why I'm even vaguely qualified to talk about this thing. When it comes to data migrations and maps and how data talks to each other. When I worked for nonprofits, it was primarily as a fundraiser who had to be assigned to a database. So my very first job, I tried to download a database. I knew it was important. I was a grant writer, but I just kind of was told, well, we need a donor database. And so I tried to download basically an open source one, and it had a 300-page documentation thing that, that didn't work. The next job that I had, I was told, let's get another free database, and that was a FileMaker Pro database that I worked on with a volunteer, and you can imagine how good that wasn't. And then I shifted into more formal databases such as Razor's Edge. Razor's Edge was my background. I used a little bit of Salesforce, Little Green Light, NeonCRM as well. Now, one major caveat that I want to put here is that my point of view is not of one of a developer. I'm not a developer. I'm going to talk about and use phrases like, Zapier and API and, data hygiene and data silos and all that stuff. But I am not a developer. If you hand me documentation, I can kind of understand what's going on there. If you tell me to program an app, I'm not going to be that person. So my point of view is from the development side. How does this empower fundraising? Because that's my background. Data's fascinating to me. Data gets me very excited, and it should to you as well. And that's what I want to unpack here, because this is the type of thing that at first glance, one, I want to thank you for taking a chance on something like this. This is a webinar that might scare people away, because data can be scary, and databases are seen as things that kind of exist as part of our job. And the reality is that we want to empower you with data, and that data needs to make your lives easier. And that's ultimately what we want to get out of this today. So why should you care about software integrations? Why should nonprofits actually even care about this? Well, first and foremost, it's costing you time. You're doing at least 2 times more work when you don't have things integrated. So if you have like an Excel spreadsheet that you are getting downloaded from PayPal, and then you are entering that into your donor management system, that's costing you time. So an easy thing to start to say to people when you're trying to initiate a project around integrations, around data automation, around a mapping project, and overall maybe even just internally cleaning up your internal database, people are going to say, well, why is this important? And the first thing you can point to is that this is costing me a lot of time. My everyday work is being impacted by this. I'll give you a concrete example. When I worked at my last job before Neon, it was at a Catholic school. And it was a Catholic school that one campaign, a capital campaign, raised $10 million. This was a very, very high-powered organization. It's a great organization in Chicago that I still love and support. But if an online donation came in, it would be from the website, but it would actually be an email that I would then have to print out credit card information. So that's a red flag there. They don't do this anymore. We fixed that. I want to make that very clear. So we had to take the piece of paper. I had to take all the pieces of paper with credit card information, walk to another building, then walk up 3 floors to the finance department and key those into a Fifth Third Bank interface. Once that batch was done, I would then walk back to my office in the other building where the development team was and enter that information to the Razor's Edge system. Now, that is an egregious example of how data is not integrated. I highly doubt that any of you are that bad, and if you are, please start chatting about that. But the reality is that that's a good example of when things are not connected, that it's going to cost you time, and in turn, that's going to cost you money. If things aren't connected, the kind of the industry phrase that is used is that there's a data silo. And so the quick definition of what a data silo is that it's a repository of fixed data that remains under the control of maybe one department and is isolated from the rest of the organization. So it's kind of like grain in a farm silo, and it's closed off from the outside elements. Now, for farming, that's a good thing. For data, that's not a good thing, because a silo means that nobody knows what's really in it, except for the people that are controlling that. And a lot of this could be either technical or company culture, nonprofit company culture. And so good examples of this are that, for instance, the accounting department does not want to have the donor database connected to the accounting system. We don't want to have it. We don't trust it. So that's a conversation. A lot of this stuff ultimately is a people problem. We're going to talk about a lot of things when it comes to how to approach this from a technical standpoint. But in all honesty, a lot of the issues are going to be process issues. These are conversations that either never occurred or occurred in a vacuum. And so when you're approaching data silos, it's always important to understand the point of view that the department that you're trying to connect with. The typical example I'd like to use in terms of two departments that typically never seem to speak the same language are development and finance. But I'm here to assure you that conversation can happen, and it can be fun, actually. Same with marketing. Same with the volunteer coordinators. Same with the events people, if you actually do that separately, or if you're a school, the student information systems, all these different things. Information silos occur when a data system is incompatible or not integrated with other data systems. And this incompatibility may occur because of the technical architecture, the applications architecture, or just how your database is set up. And so you can talk it through, and that's a good starting point in terms of what are the pain points. So data silos, otherwise known sometimes as shadow databases, technical nonprofit tech consultant Robert Weiner uses shadow databases. That's another fun one. Another concrete example that might exist in your organization is your executive director basically saying, well, I just keep everything in my email. I don't enter it into the CRM. It's in my email. I have it. Or they point to their head and they go, it's in here. Yeah, well, it's always good to use the I'm going to get hit by an ice cream truck example, because if the person who has that information has not documented that, and it's not clear how things connect or where that data is or even how to access that information, then that goes away. One of the jobs where I worked at, basically a lot of my jobs, and I think what helps drive me today is because I had such bad data situations. And the second one, before I got there, before I even started, one of the founders literally walked out of the organization with the access database on a computer. There goes the donor information. It was gone. And so a lot of this, when you're approaching integrations, it's important to have discussions about access, security, and approaching it though with an openness and transparency. So it's a balance that you have to have there. But silos ultimately are going to hurt you, because that means that things are not consistent. Things are being closed off. Even the naming of things, when you're sending out an email campaign versus doing a capital campaign, or a mobile giving campaign or something like that, are all those going to connect? Because ultimately, I know I'm painting a little bit of a bleak picture, but a lot of people have this problem. This is a problem that affects a lot of organizations. The industry average is that nonprofits have typically about 5 different systems, and none of them talk to each other. So they have their MailChimp email list, their website forms for volunteer sign up, which is maybe a PDF that somebody prints out and then emails to an email that's listed on the web page, a PayPal button, or maybe a Network for Good page, or Razoo, or Mighty Cause, whatever it's called now, all those different things. And then all of that is individually loaded into, something like Razor's Edge or Salesforce or something like that. Now, I have some fun news. We actually did ask the group here, how many databases do all of you work with? And so we had some interesting stats. About 158 of the people, because we had a fair amount of folks register for this, so 158 of you said you only have one. You only have one data source, which is great. So that either means that you've centralized things or you literally only have one thing. 2 or 3 was the most. That had 193 folks. So that's probably somebody, I would guess, that has a pretty hefty, pretty decent donor management system and maybe some email stuff. Maybe an auction system here or there. Then we get into people, about 42 of you had 3 or 4, and interesting, and then it just kind of goes down from there. Some people had as high as 7, but 135 of you said 0. And so I want to know who you folks are. So either I count Excel. Okay, so personally, if you're using an Excel spreadsheet, or even you're just searching your Gmail or your Outlook, that's a data source. I mean, heck, even pieces of paper that you're physically filing, which is still a requirement for a lot of the GAAP procedures for accounting reconciliation, you still have to have like physical filing papers. That counts. That's a data source. It just might not be digital. So for the 135 of you that said you had 0, maybe it's all in your head, and kudos to that, but let's get it out of your head. So on average, though, industry-wide, about 5 different systems. There's just a lot of stuff going on, and we keep getting inundated with more and more and more different things to use, all the flashy widgets. Connect your Snapchat with your social media campaigns, and then that's going to lead to donations, and you got to push back against the shiny object syndrome and really got to look at this from a core database of record approach. What is the primary thing that we want to build here? And when you integrate your data, it should be to empower your organization with better quality data that will help you personalize your engagements with folks, maximize your fundraising, because if people get personalized messages that tell you or tell the donor that you are paying attention to who they are beyond the money, they're going to give you more money. They're going to come back and continue to give to you. And it's going to make your end-to-end reporting better. It's going to be more accurate. The board's going to be happier. Your boss is going to be happier. You're going to be happier. And it can extend functionality. You're going to be able to do things once you set up a good foundation for integrations, that when that next new technology that you do want to test out, that you do want to plug into your systems, when you want to try it, it'll work and it won't screw everything up. So integration helps, because when systems talk to each other, and there's a wide variety of ways that we can approach this, that's what I'm going to unpack very shortly. But overall, it really comes down to better quality data means that you can raise more money. That's it. That's a big takeaway here. So what is an integration? I keep saying the word integration, and I'm at Neon, I'm not in sales at this point. I got my start there in sales. I've been there for about 7 years, but I'm not in sales now. I actually oversee our partner program for integrations and stuff like this. But I'm going to give you a dirty secret in the sales world. If a salesperson tells you that they integrate with something, double check that they don't mean that it's an import or export. Oh yeah, we integrate with that. We totally integrate with Emma or Action Network or ActBlue. Well, what does that mean? We're going to talk about what real integrations are, but typically an import-export situation is not a real integration. Now, there are some exceptions to this. I would say that if you can set up a pre-map situation that is consistently repeatable, and that's the only way that you can get data into a system, that's cool. That's cool. Great example of this is Zeidman Consulting and Omatic do a lot of stuff for the Blackbaud network, for instance. And Omatic software, awesome tool that can basically take an Excel spreadsheet, a CSV file, or comma separated value for short, and just quickly upload that into something like Razor's Edge. And so that's cool. That's a good approach when it's an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV, but that's not the best practice overall. And the world is not stopping there. That's actually an old way to do integration. So be careful when a salesperson says that they integrate with something. We're going to talk about the ones that are a little bit more better than an import-export. Now, again, some situations this is perfectly fine, but that's only going to get harder as the world moves on. Concrete examples are things like QuickBooks. QuickBooks does not accept a batch file of Excel for transactions. You can upload people, but it's just not going to accept like a bunch of transactions because the ways that you can integrate with it are not focused on a batch upload of data. So how can you approach software integrations overall? Well, the first is built-in partners. So these are when the company, in the case of something like Neon, for instance, we built our own integrations or people build into us. So donor management systems or CRMs are starting to prioritize this more, which is a good thing. And any vendor worth their who wants to keep clients is going to do some sort of integration at this point. So for Neon, we actually have a robust testing approach where if we build it, obviously we're doing quality assurance testing. But if somebody builds into us, we have a certification program for nonprofit best practices. So if somebody builds into us, we're not going to promote it unless it actually, cuts the mustard, so to speak. So things like data consistency, things like duplicate creation, we're taking that into account. So even if your vendor doesn't have a official certification program, I would imagine that the more nonprofit focused vendors out there have done some sort of quality control. So check with them on that, but it's going to have documentation. It's going to say, we trust this. This is why we're promoting it. So a lot of popular vendors, email's a very popular one. So Constant Contact, MailChimp, QuickBooks, very, very big one. But then there's other accounting platforms like Microsoft Dynamics and Sage and Peachtree that have limited integrations as well. QuickBooks is pretty robust, and they actually have a certification program themselves. But then those are the big ones that a lot of people end up connecting with. So the good ones to start with when it comes to a built-in partner are, in all honesty, the ones that meet your needs. But most nonprofits are going to have to reconcile their books, and they're going to have to communicate with people. So integrations that cover those things are good places to start. But you might get into the more niche stuff. So like if you're an advocacy nonprofit, maybe integrating with a platform like One Click Politics, or Phone to Action or stuff like that. Those are things that are going to be important to you. And then there's other kind of cool marketing things that are coming out like CauseVid. CauseVid is a thank you video platform, and it syncs with a few different stuff out there. So those are things that might not be necessary, but that goes back to if you have a good approach around overall systems management and you understand that where things are going and how things are mapped out and kind of connected to each other, then that's going to help. And then that adding on those little niche products are going to be useful. Now, built-in partners, kind of the elephant in the room here is Salesforce. Because Salesforce is awesome for this, right? It's got so many different things in the App Exchange. But this gets to the heart of the data maps portion of what we would want to talk about today. Because ultimately, it's important for you to lay out when somebody uses the term campaign or donor or naming somebody or talking about phone numbers or things like that, all the base data points, is there an internal consistency from platform to platform? The official name for this is a taxonomy. And so that kind of has its framing from the ecological world, but it's like, how do you name things? So when we are using an email platform and our donor management system, and there's a first name, are they both the same? Like, is Bob the same Bob first name field as the Bob first name field over here in A versus B versus C, etc. So laying it out and understanding how things integrate with each other and actually mapping out where things live is important. And that's why Salesforce can be difficult, because while they have some consistency, there is no standardization, so to speak, between every single Salesforce system across the platform. So this is not ripping on Salesforce, because it's got a lot of openness, and that's a very beautiful thing. I want to make that very clear. And they have a pretty good approach when it comes to their App Exchange of things that are supposed to be in there. But when it comes to nonprofits, it's very important for you to make sure that if something is mapping into the database of record, which is typically the donor management system, it's the thing that you're relying on to help manage all the people and the transactions from a stewardship standpoint, not an accounting standpoint, from a stewardship standpoint, it's important to know that there's consistency, because that helps with that end-to-end reporting. So a lot of vendors are going to have some built-in folks. Some more than others, but pretty much everybody's doing something today. So then one of the cooler things, and this is how geeked out I am, I'm actually wearing a Zapier shirt. Zapier is a pretty nifty tool, and we're going to have some follow-up resources, and I imagine there may be some questions. And please, if you're interested in asking questions, I'm not checking the box right now for questions. I'm going to wait till the end, but happy to answer stuff. So put it in the questions box. We'll definitely talk about it. But Zapier is a big one. If you haven't heard of Zapier, it's a really cool tool that helps it connects more than 1,000 different apps and basically automates a time-consuming task that might be data entry. So concrete example is maybe you got a survey that you did through SurveyMonkey or something like that. What Zapier can do is that you can say, okay, instead of me downloading every single person who took the survey, I want to just put that into my donor management system as a person. And Zapier can say, okay, it's basically, if this happens in this system, what happens in another system? If this, then that, which actually is the name of another data automation system, but that's more smart home focused, tell Google to turn my lights on, that type of stuff. And that's a really good, personal way to start to think about this, is if you've started using or have a smart speaker in your home and you ask Google to turn on the lights or mess with the thermostat, that's like the home equivalent of what we're talking about here. So the industry as a whole is starting to do this stuff. So Zapier is not nonprofit specific, but it can definitely help nonprofits. So for instance, in Neon, if somebody makes a donation, it can talk to a system like Lob, which can automatically get a mailed letter out to person without your organization needing to do it. Lob is a cool platform that allows physical mail to be automatically structured, set, and then sent. Now that might scare people. That might worry you. So you can put in, either don't use that Zap and we're going to get into testing on things like this, or look at Zaps that are more specific to your everyday tasks. So Gmail is in there. Google Calendar is in there. All the major email platforms, event platforms, things like Slack, things like Twitter. So maybe it might not be your development team that ends up utilizing this a lot, but your marketing team might love it, because it might be something like whenever a chat from our live chat system on our website comes in, pop it on over into the client engagement program, something like that. So, or anytime a tweet is done, or somebody makes a donation, through Action Sprouts Facebook connection, pop it into something else. So Zapier is really cool. Again, I'm a huge fan. I'm actually wearing their shirt today. Right before this, I tweeted, me sitting at my desk. It's cool, colors, cool logo, cool program, and pretty affordable pricing. So there's thousands of things. Not every donor management system is honestly in there. I can attest, as somebody who's gone through the testing program for Zapier, it is stringent, and they care very, very deeply about data hygiene. So this is something that it can be very powerful if you use it right, and is one of the things that you should definitely check out. And I imagine more and more nonprofit platforms like Neon are going to do it. We're in it, and it's cool. It's super cool. Okay, then it gets into the custom stuff, and this is where it can get a little wonky. So the gold standard is an API. And an API stands for Application Programming Interface. Now, this is, again, where I'm not a developer. So this developer tool set, cool. I can't even design that graphic, but I know what it means when it comes to this type of stuff. So the technical language is an API is a set of subroutine definitions, protocols, and tools for building software. In layman's terms, it means that you can build connections between different software. This is how, when Neon talks to Constant Contact, we talk through an API. And so an API allows other systems to talk to each other in a more deeper sense. Zapier is technically relying on API stuff. An API just allows, when you log into your system, if you log into something like eTapestry, Donor Perfect, Bloomerang, a Kindful, all these databases have APIs. Some are more exposed than others, but it really means that if I look at a donor's record and it says first name, I would be able to use an API to either pull that data out and look at it in a report, or push that into another system like a Constant Contact. So I'm using first name, last name as simple stuff, but it can be donations. It can be event registrations. It can be volunteer information or completely custom information, because developers can use an open API to connect to different platforms. And an open API is absolutely critical for data quality. This is the thing that helps tie the entire internet together. Little things such as when you go to a website and it says log in with your Facebook account, log in with your Google account. That's API. And that's taking information from your Gmail or your Facebook and saying, cool, this is Tim. Tim, welcome to Thumbtack. The tool that allows you to review landscapers and stuff like that. I did that earlier today. I was lazy. I didn't want to create a new password. I used Google because I'm secure with my Google account. So these types of things lead into much larger custom programming. Now, your organization could potentially build this on their own. Developers can build this on their own. So there's a big difference, and this is getting into a tiny bit of industry inside baseball on how software companies like Neon work, but we have a development schedule that we say, this is what we're going to prioritize and build. And the vast majority of things that we build, we are focused on our own software. We're saying let's get people excited about using Neon, and we want people in Neon to do reporting and do GIFs and stuff like that. But sometimes there's a really cool integration that we might want to do. And so Constant Contact is a great example. When we polled our user base, we got about 3,000 organizations, and we said, what do you want to work with? And they said Constant Contact. We're like, okay, we're going to build that. So that's a built-in integration, and we used an API for that with Constant Contact. But here's the thing. Ours is open. Constant Contacts is open. If a developer wanted to come in who works for a nonprofit or is a really energized tech for good type person, the Salesforce ecosystem is like full of these people, they might build it their own. They might do it on their own. There's some really cool firms out there like Back Office Thinking and Sidekick Solutions that have even built things into Zapier and Shopify for companies that the company really might not even know about it other than they see some data from that system. So do keep that in mind, that the beauty and also the concern is that a third-party developer can do it for you. Now, the problem on that side is data hygiene and consistency, because a lot of times a developer is going to say, well, I know APIs, but they might not know the donor management system. So it's important to ensure that any platform, be it a donor management system, an email system, an advocacy system, a volunteer system, has good documentation, has a testing environment, and has a support forum or way that developers can have their questions answered. Those are very, very important for a supportive open API. So there is the possibility that if you go to your vendor and they say, well, we're not interested in building this, that you still might be able to get it. I imagine I'm going to get some questions on where do I find these people? We'll talk about that. That's probably one of the hardest things that I can put out there, but APIs are really cool. At the end of the day, that's the main thing that that I want to talk about when it comes to APIs, is that they're really awesome. And so those are the customization options that exist. So they could be built in, they could be kind of point-to-point things for very simple data muling, so to speak, or it could be something completely custom. And this also extends to your website too. So Google Maps having an API, like everything, a lot of stuff has an API. So WordPress, Drupal, all these different things, a lot of this stuff can connect and live with each other, which is really cool. So here's the, yes, this is cool, but watch out thing that I want to make sure that we all do. Because if you're working on an integration project, and a lot of the step-by-step stuff is going to be in that fantastic objective Idealware guide that we're going to push you to download. It is awesome. It kind of helps walk through way more than I'd be able to today in terms of how to like structure an integration process, but testing is important. So I always suggest that you do like a control record or a small data set before you roll out the whole thing. So let's say you're using Zapier. They have built-in testing, like test that the thing works before you actually go and turn it on for everybody. Like, you want to know what's going to happen. And this can even be for little things. Sometimes, like, I was talking to an organization that uses Blackbaud stuff, and they weren't sure like how Razor's Edge NXT talks with the classic view. And I was like, just do a test, like update something in NXT and see if it actually translates back into Razor's Edge Classic. Little things like that before you start undertaking a very large scale data overhaul is going to save you a lot of time. And you shouldn't even be doing testing if you haven't like had a conversation of data expectations in the first place. Again, the Idealware guide is going to go a lot deeper on some project stuff, but for time consistency, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions, which please continue to submit those through the questions box. Want to make sure that we cover a lot of stuff today. So what are you going to do when you start getting data connected and integrated? How are you going to get results? So first, we're going to do a poll. I want to make sure that you're all still awake. So I'm going to launch a little poll. Besides donations, what's the most important information that your nonprofit wants to track? I'm going to launch this poll. All right. So we're going to let this be open for a little bit. Want to get at least 75%. Keep it going. Let's keep it going. We got about 60, little over 60%. Coming up to 30 seconds. We're going to close it very soon. We are almost there. We are almost there. All right, I think that's good enough. So I'm going to share the results. Let's take a look. So besides donations, what's the most important information your nonprofit wants to track? And I know that I kind of forced you into you have to choose, right? And that's fine. You know, this is just kind of a gut check on what's most important. I think it's actually interesting that it kind of cascades down. And one item that I wish that I added is actually program data. I have a good concrete story around that I'll share. But communications is not surprising. Communication information is a pretty important one. Event information is always important, but I can understand why communications is almost 50%. So I think that's pretty cool. Maybe not everyone's doing advocacy, so I can understand why that's small too. But communications are important, and it also might depend on what communications we're talking about, right? Is it email? Is it a physical meeting? Did I have a phone call? Where's all this live? And so a lot of times an integration is going to help when it comes to a mass email platform like Constant Contact, MailChimp, you know, Emma, stuff like that. So why are these important? What can you get out of them? The very first important thing is comprehensive reporting, because what you'd be able to do is mix and match information. So for instance, if you connect Eventbrite to your donor management system, you'd be able to see people who register in an Eventbrite and bring that in and go, okay, even though I didn't use Eventbrite or my donor management system for my event, I could still see event registration information. So again, you know, a fair amount of you said event information. And Eventbrite connects with a lot of different things. It's a pretty popular one that a lot of systems connect to. So that's a good example of looking into if a platform can connect. And then where does that data live? Is it called its own thing? Or does it live under other standard data that you would expect it to? So it depends. It really depends. And so by bringing data in and making sure that it's mapped, that things are going to where you expect them to, you're going to get deeper insights from cross-platform reporting. You're going to see trends such as, you know, it looks like all my volunteers continue to open my emails, but they're not donating. Maybe I need to do something a little more personal to them, because typically volunteers are one of the best potential groups for getting a donation from. And so this is going to also cut down on manual reporting that I have to pop out 7 Excel files in order to combine them and, you know, use VLOOKUP and all that stuff. If you even do that, you know, it's going to be able to cut down on that. So comprehensive reporting is going to help with integrations if something is living into a powerful platform, typically your donor management system. Membership management too. Gotta remember those folks as well. And it's also going to help with personalized engagement, because if you have everything in one place, you're going to be able to create more tailored communications. And most donors, 53% of donors cite the reason that they stop supporting a nonprofit is because of poor communication. And so if you have better data on people, you can create better appeals and create better asks. Concrete example is when I was living in Chicago, I adopted 2 cats. Still have them. They're tooling around in my house. And so when I moved to upstate New York for my wife, getting a job up here, you know, I was going to work remotely and all that good stuff, but we brought the cats with us. So we love the cats. And here's the thing. When I would get appeals from the place that we adopted the cats from, they would never reference that we adopted the cats. I don't even need them to reference the names. I just want them to say, you've invested in our mission in a real way. And they never did that. And that always bothered me. And all that meant was taking data from basically their adoption system, and all that had to do was add one little flag in the donor record to say, has adopted, yes. And all they'd have to do is create a slightly different appeal, and they would have got me. I know for a fact, because it would have shown that they paid attention. And ultimately, when you have data silos, it makes it more difficult for you to create that personalized engagement. So I want to make sure we have time for good questions. So let's go through some of these last slides in terms of why this is important. You're going to maximize your fundraising. You could build relationships, real relationships. Good data is going to lead to better relationships. I remember working at that Catholic school, and we printed out the name tags, and you know, you didn't use the nickname field. And a woman actually had crossed out during an event that we had. She crossed out her name tag and wrote her preferred name. And I ran up to our database and I updated that. And so if that can extend out into communications, your events, all those different things, if you have that good data and it can talk to different systems, you're going to be able to maximize those connections with people, and people are going to be happier. And happier people mean that they donate. And so if you integrate with great tools that are focused on stewardship, things like donor surveys, things like video platforms, these are becoming things that you have to pay attention to, because a lot of, if we pay attention to what's happening in the world outside of the nonprofit tech world, you're seeing more video, you're seeing more surveys, you're seeing more big quote unquote data. So how can we leverage that specific to nonprofits? Because it is different, and we need nonprofit solutions for that. And it can also extend your functionality. So you can think about new ways that you can actually fit. And you want a home for all this data, even if it doesn't fit in the existing database. If things talk, like for instance, going back to the adoption example that I shared, I don't need like every single piece or checkup to live in the donor database. But if things can talk to each other and at least automate the essential items, that makes things better. So by extending functionality, it cuts down on the need for spreadsheets. So if you have protocol where different departments understand how they're coming together and helping with each other, then that common ground helps everybody. That common ground helps everybody, because on the program side, if you start working with program data, if a donor comes in and they've helped fund a particular project, the program people who maybe they're doing a tour, if they're able to know that and reference that, they feel more empowered too. So it's not just the development department. So, okay, I think that's a good point. I want to stop for questions that we may have at this point.
Wonderful. Tim, thank you so much for all of this great insight. I know I learned a lot. I hope that everybody listening learned a lot as well, and there were a lot of really great questions. Don't hesitate to keep sending them in. We'll get to as many as we can. I know there are a lot of burning questions that everybody has. In the event that we don't get to some of your questions, we'll do our best to follow up with you personally via email after the webinar to try to get as many of your questions answered as possible.
Sure.
One of the interesting ones that we got from Dee Dee was, can you address any security issues that may arise as a result of all of these integrations? I know that's obviously something that's really top of mind right now with a lot of the different security issues that we've experienced. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you on that.
Security, any good tech firm is going to put security first. And so the way that typically APIs, for instance, work, and this is either cool. And so when it comes to, integrations and security and stuff like that, a lot of people are going to worry about that. And so a very simple thing that you can ensure is to check with your software vendor around authentication and things of that nature. So if you're going to talk to QuickBooks, and Mark, I did see the note about gap stuff. Again, I'm not a CPA, so sorry about if that was incorrect information about paper records, but reconciling with your QuickBooks is very important. And so you want to make sure that the financial data that is very sensitive is going to be processed over in a secure way, then a lot of vendors, one, the way you even connect the systems, they're going to be in a way that's very secure. So the most obvious example of this is credit card processing, which technically is an integration. And so there's things around PCI compliance where it's ensuring that somebody who processes a credit card, that data is getting encrypted. And there's a lot of things that are going to go into that to make sure that's secure. But check with the vendor on how they approach security around that type of stuff. And so in order to even get the integration set up, typically there is security elements, maybe providing something which is called like an API key. And so an API key is going to help when it comes to security, because that's a special code that is specific to the person who is actually doing the connection. And then there's an audit trail. So audit trails are important for this type of stuff. Not auditing in an accounting sense, but in tech world, more importantly, is a security sense. And then there's also on the API side and the vendor side, there might even be like permission controls within the platform itself. Like Neon, for instance, when we connect to QuickBooks, we have it that that you can turn off that certain people can't touch like certain functionality. They can't touch the constant contact integration. They can't touch the Eventbrite integration. They can't touch the QuickBooks integration. And even if they can, with QuickBooks especially, if somebody wants to delete or change something, that they have to enter a special code, again, going down to that reconciliation best practices. A lot of accountants typically don't want people messing with the books after it's closed. So these are things that should be built in and anticipated by the vendor or the person who's doing your custom programming when it comes to both field level security as well as overall system security. But those are questions that you should always check with your vendor on how they authenticate first and how they handle security after things have been connected.
Thanks, Tim. Those are some great insights, and I'm sure everybody will kind of take those back with them as you kind of search your next step for software integrations. And on the line of kind of next steps, Richard asked a question that's basically kind of, where do we start? Is it the right approach to choose a base system and then find out what apps are kind of built into the system? We listened to this webinar, and now what do we do? Where do we start?
Ooh, Richard, that's a great question. Okay, so first and foremost, it honestly depends on what you're prioritizing at your organization. Now, we're gonna plug the Idealware guide, again, a very objective guide on how to approach these projects a little bit holistically. But I think that a decent starting takeaway is focusing in on what's the database of record, right? Like, I would make an argument that your email system is important, but shouldn't be your database of record, that your donor management, your CRM, or constituent relationship management in the nonprofit world, so, something like Neon, Salesforce, Blackbaud, etc., those are the places that you should start. And then you look at the surrounding ecosystem, and some are going to be very open, some are going to be not as open, but start there. Another good, so I would start with built-in stuff, because typically that's the things that have been signed off on by the vendor themselves. Not always, you got to be careful. In terms of the vendor might just be more interested in a marketing relationship, and so they might not have actually vetted the integration. So check on that. But at least with Neon, in my experience, we run people through testing in order to even market them. Marketing comes after. So most of my buddies in the software world are going to be doing some sort of testing. I will say that. So I don't want to freak anybody out. But it doesn't hurt to ask, what do you do to test integrations? That's a simple question that you can ask, and a vendor should be able to answer that. And then in terms of the pecking order, again, I keep talking about this Idealware guide, and I'm going to actually put that on the screen in terms of URL. This will be in a follow-up email, for instance. Go to that URL. And this is a good one because they actually like go through and have a really cool chart that's going to help you prioritize what's most important. So that's what I'd start with. I always start with the thing that helps house the money from a stewardship standpoint. Um, I don't care what your CPA says. QuickBooks is not a donor management system, so that's where transactions go to end. And so you got to focus in on the thing where you're having high touch engagements. For major donor cultivation, it's going to take about 18 touch points to get somebody across as a major donor, right? You're not going to be doing that in through solely email or something that's tracking just the gifts or just your events, right? You want something that's going to be a little bit more flexible and people focused, and so that's where you should start.
No, that's great. We had another question come through from Anna, and it's basically, a lot of nonprofits use a donor database as a catch-all for everything, including kind of volunteer management. Do you have recommendations for ways to kind of integrate and research volunteer management software versus kind of donor database software?
Yeah. So my second job, I actually ran the volunteer program there, and I used Excel, so it didn't even connect to the donor management system. Yeah, that's a tough one, because donor management systems are kind of focused on transactions, right? And so that's why a lot of people love Salesforce, for instance, because it's a people-focused database like Neon, and so there's a lot more flexibility around volunteer tags. But even at the very least, it depends on what you want to do with it, right? Like, do you need it to take applications? Do you need it to track hours? Do you need it to do shift management? Do you need it to just be project management? And some platforms have that stuff built in, but some of them, like a long-standing eTapestry connection, is to Volunteer Hub. Great platform. And they've had a great relationship with eTapestry for years. And so sometimes you're going to be able to build into something that's pretty solid. Now, if you're just starting to look for where to start with volunteer management programs, go to Idealware. Idealware has some great stuff. I know GuideStar puts out some great guides too. These are resources that N10's another great one, where they might have existing reviews of other software. I know that Idealware outright has a volunteer one, so that's a good place to start. I always encourage people to check them out. But GuideStar, I know, focuses in on some great things like that too. So great industry partners like GuideStar, Chronicle Philanthropy, N10, Idealware are always a good objective place to start. Again, and maybe my marketing person will kill me after this, but like, there was this time, and we've done it too, where a bunch of vendors put out like, check out the CRM review guide and all the best practices. Yeah, that's fine. There's going to be some nice stuff in there, but that's marketing focused. Like, there's a lot of objective things that I'd actually prefer that you start with when it comes to the reality of what's going to help you. A vendor is going to have a point of view. They want you to buy their software. I'm excited for people to learn about Neon. I think it's great, but like, that's our point of view. So when it comes to an objective approach, you got a lot of options when it comes to that. And Idealware is a good one to start with. GuideStar obviously is a good one to start with because you're here.
Awesome. And we're just about at the top of the hour, so we're not going to be able to answer any more questions on the webinar, but as I said just a little bit ago, we'll be doing our best to go through all of the questions that we received on today's webinar and email responses to those of you that we did not get a chance to answer your question live today, so not to worry. I want to extend a huge thank you to Tim and NeonCRM for making today's presentation possible. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Again, we'll be sending out the recording of today's webinar along with the presentation slides and some additional resources after the webinar concludes, probably in the next day or so. So be on the lookout for that. But of course, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to email us at webinars@guidestar.org, and we'll do our best to answer any questions that you have. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and we look forward to connecting with you on another presentation again soon. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.